First, Israel's war cabinet fell apart. Now, the state is at loggerheads with the army that serves as its backbone. Israeli Defense Forces spokesperson Daniel Hagari has appeared to publicly challenge Israel's prime minister. Now, Hagari is a familiar face to those who've been following Israel's genocidal assault on Gaza. He's probably well known to all of you. He has been front and centre since the Hamas attacks of 7th October, denying claims that the IDF have been committing war crimes and genocide in Gaza. But now Hagari has come out to say that Hamas cannot be defeated.
Hamas is an idea. Hamas is a party, and it is implanted in people's hearts. Whoever thinks that we can demolish Hamas is wrong. It is the Muslim Brotherhood that has been present in the region for many years. But what can be done is to create something else to replace it and make the population realize that there is another party. It distributes food and provides social services. Who is this party that replaces Hamas at the political level? And is this the way to weaken Hamas? I cannot discuss the alternatives. The political leadership must decide, and the army implements the decision. But the issue that Hamas can be destroyed and Hamas can disappear is just to throw dust into the public's eyes. If we do not bring something else as an alternative in Gaza, Hamas will remain.
Now, who has been saying Hamas can be destroyed over and over and over again? Benjamin Netanyahu. And he said it again following Hagari's comments. Netanyahu's office released a statement saying the Prime Minister had defined the destruction of Hamas's military and governing capabilities as one of the goals of the war. The Israeli military, of course, is committed to this. This is pretty big. The IDF's top spokesperson has essentially accused Netanyahu of misleading the Israeli public and admitted Hamas cannot be defeated. This is open rebellion, and Israel is a militarized society. It is built on that military. This idea that Hamas cannot be defeated is also something people have been saying from the very beginning of this latest episode in Israel's assaults on Gaza. This is from a piece published in The Nation by Tony Caron and Daniel Levy in December 2023, 8 weeks into the war, and it was titled, "Israel is Losing This War." Western politicians and media like to fantasize that Hamas is a ISIS-style nihilistic cadre holding Palestinian society hostage. Hamas is, in fact, a multifaceted political movement rooted in the fabric and national aspirations of Palestinian society. It embodies a belief, grimly affirmed by decades of Palestinian experience, that armed resistance is central to the Palestinian Liberation Project because of the failures of the Oslo process and the intractable hostility of its adversary. And its influence and popularity have grown as Israel and its allies keep thwarting a peace process and other non-violent strategies for pursuing Palestinian liberation. You think about Hamas and you think about what's happened to Palestinians in Gaza over the last X amount of months. And all that's happened is they have been pummeled. They've been killed. They have been displaced. They have seen Gaza ruined, razed to the ground. And every time a ceasefire is on the table, you have a rejection from Israel and the US. And you imagine that those conditions are not going to give rise to further adherence or signing up to the fact that the only way that there will be liberation in Palestine is through meeting fire with fire. Michael, what do you think it means that top IDF representatives are openly defying Netanyahu? Could Israel be forced into a ceasefire? Are we going to see the IDF mutiny? Would that lead to a ceasefire?
I suppose I'm not expert enough to know whether there could possibly be a mutiny. I suppose it's probably no coincidence that this comes at the same time that Benny Gantz has sort of left the war cabinet. Benny Gantz, a former general, so very close to the military. Netanyahu, of course, more of a political animal. He's been a politician for decades, whereas Benny Gantz, much more recently, was a top figure in the IDF. I suppose looking at sort of Israeli internal politics, I think there's a mistake that sort of Western liberals sometimes make, which is to say there is a sort of there's a part of the Israeli political establishment which wants a greater Israel and wants to see sort of the Palestinians completely subjugated and doesn't want a two-state solution. And then there's the extremist who's Netanyahu, who wants the greater Israel, who doesn't want a two-state solution. That's nonsense. Everyone in the top of the Israeli political establishment at the moment seems fairly committed to a greater Israel, does have no interest whatsoever in a Palestinian state, and doesn't seem to shed any tears when tens of thousands of Palestinians get killed. But I think you probably are seeing some division now between people who are acting, Netanyahu very much acting just in his own self-interest at this point, so his own political survival, whereas Benny Gantz is thinking, well, and the IDF, sort of the military, sort of in terms of the interests of the state. And the interests of the state, aren't a two-state solution. People, I think, sometimes like to kid themselves that it's sort of Israel's national self-interest to make peace with the Palestinians. It's probably not, right? The Israelis can, if they want, if no one stops them, they probably can have a greater Israel. They can do sort of the slow, gentle ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. I mean, obviously, ethnic cleansing is never gentle, but the sort of in the West Bank, it's this sort of slow, continuous process as opposed to the dramatic genocidal catastrophe we're seeing in Gaza right now. They probably can do that, just as the whites in apartheid South Africa probably could have maintained their power for a very long time, and you would have had, within the apartheid white establishment, you would have had some people who used harsher languages, who sounded a bit more extreme, and then you would have had people who said, let's try and make our apartheid look a bit more reasonable. The only thing that changed the dial was massive external pressure to say, no, that's no longer an option that you can have. And I mean, the same thing is going to apply to Israel, right? The only way that, I think most people are probably thinking, obviously a ceasefire is better than no ceasefire. But if you're looking at Benny Gantz, the military versus Netanyahu, in either case, you are looking at a somewhat genocidal process going on. You're looking at ethnic cleansing. You're looking at the formation of a greater Israel. You're looking at the undermining of any possibility of a future Palestinian state. So I do think, sort of in terms of the immediate future, obviously a ceasefire really matters because people are still getting killed every day in Gaza. There's no point in saying, oh, in the big scheme of things, a ceasefire doesn't matter. A ceasefire does matter. But this sort of focus on internal factional disputes within the Israeli establishment, which I think it's important for us to do, by the way, shouldn't distract from the fact that the only thing which is going to bring about any kind of reasonable possibility of life for Palestinians is going to be massive external pressure.
I do want to just double down on the fact there is no such thing as gentle ethnic cleansing. Ethnic cleansing is never gentle. It just sometimes is done in a way that the West can look away from when it happens. And right now the West is trying to look away, but because it's of such a scale and concentration, it simply can't. And also because we have access to the internet. But ethnic cleansing is never gentle. It just might happen on a smaller scale, but it's devastating for the lives of the people that are directly affected by it. I also think with South Africa, remember it was internal resistance first. So something changes within the internal setup. There was always a resistance that comes first. People resist every single day. You look at the transatlantic slave movement, for example. Something that I learned from doing work upon that was, there's this idea of like the abolition movement that seems to just, this immaculate conception of the abolition movement, and suddenly there was all this external pressure that just came and we decided to stop slavery. No, every single day people resisted the violence, the genocidal nature of the transatlantic slave trade. Every single day people chose to resist, whether that was through rebellion, whether that was through literally removing themselves from life, whether that's from running away, whether that was from organizing to get, there was resistance on different scales every single day, and that adds up and adds up and adds up until that external pressure is also part of the factors. And one of the things that is argued in the piece that Daniel Levy and Tony Caron write about Israel losing this war is that what Hamas have done is just completely blow up the status quo. With October 7th, what they did was blow up the status quo in a very violent way. But it has reset the dial. Unfortunately, the cost of that might be, this horrendous genocide. But we don't know how it's going to fall out. We don't know what the resolution to that is going to be, but it has reset the status quo in some way. Whether that's going to preserve lives in the long run, we will see. But like we say, we cover all these different stories. We talk about the election, but we cannot forget that while we are doing this every single day, that this ethnic cleansing is going on. At such a horrific scale that it seems unmatched by anything else in the world at the moment.